My love for Red Dead Redemption 2 is huge. I still make content on this game 4 years and a bit after its launch, and it's brilliant in my opinion in every single aspect. My opinion isn't an unpopular one either. This game has over the years seen over 46 million copies sold, making it the 8th best-selling video game of all time. The tragedy of Arthur Morgan and the journey of the Van der Linde gang is an experience you seldom get in any storytelling medium, let alone video games. It really hit home just how much a game can be if every single aspect is crafted with precision and care. It's not a particularly innovative game, it's pretty standard Rockstar open world formula, quite restrictive unless the game explicitly gives you options when you're doing missions and all that, and that's another topic, a good talking point perhaps for another day, maybe later this year when this game turns 5 years old for example. You can name your horse Megatron, watch its testicles expand, shoot some O'Driscolls, explore deep, rich environmental storytelling, antagonise funny looking NPCs, and you get the idea. You can very much so involve yourself in Arthur Morgan's life and by extension involve yourself in this fantastic parody world and experience a sad story within it. The care and attention to detail that went into this game in my mind is second to none. So when I pivot and look at what Rockstar Games and Take-Two Interactive have done with the game's online component, aptly named Red Dead Online, it simply baffles me, and not in a good way. In wake of Grand Theft Auto 5, and GTA Online, a live service that's maintained with fresh content up to this day, a full-on decade after that game's launch, and there's no surprise it's the second best-selling game of all time, which was also developed by Rockstar Games, and the success of that 9-10 year strong live service, you'd also expect doing a live service for Red Dead Online, a multiplayer component to another one of the top 10 best-selling games ever, wouldn't be an issue, however you'd be wrong. Red Dead Online, 4 years after its launch, is somewhat abandoned, at least by its creators, with only minor changes and nonsensical nothing content added maybe once in a blue moon. For an average game, that doesn't sound like a terrible run, but Red Dead Online never really got going in the first place. It's been in a pitiful state more or less since its beta launch. To interject, you're probably wondering why I'm even talking about this now. I guess the simple answer is I felt like it, but it is something that I've wanted to tackle for a good while. You may notice that I don't talk about Red Dead Online much despite my constant content for the single player mode, and it's only fair that I sit down and deliver a critique to the best of my limited ability on what I would call the downfall of Red Dead Online, but that would imply that it had ever accomplished greatness in the first place. And I can't say that I've ever been convinced that that's the case. This isn't some forgotten multiplayer mode. Red Dead Online still has many players. Not as many as it once did, but that's because it's been neglected. That's inevitable. You are still looking at thousands of players online at any given moment though. Why? Because it's Red Dead Redemption 2. But online. Red Dead Online's beta initially released on the 27th of November 2018, only a month after the launch of Red Dead Redemption 2. Initially, as a lot of betas are, it was plagued with problems. Besides from a few missions, nothing really felt too engaging. Walking into town and immersing yourself in this amazing world Rockstar had created with friends was ruined by being shot at first sight by the first player you didn't know, and the economy was pants. Things would cost an awful lot to acquire, more than they'd cost in the single player for the same type of item. However, money was harder to come by. You'd be earning minuscule amounts for the grinding you'd do, and it was clearly designed with microtransactions in mind. And if your meagre income from completing activities wasn't bad enough, you'd be taxed regularly for stable and camp upkeep. Whoever's idea that was needs a hard lesson in the definition of escapism. Nobody pays taxes in real life to also need to pay them in video games too. And besides, it's clearly another minor inconvenience in a list of many to make the game's microtransactions seem more appealing. Mind you, once you're deep into the game you're sorted and won't have to worry about it, but for the individual who acknowledges that Red Dead Online in its current state wasn't worth more than a couple hours with mates here and there, it was quite annoying. A couple weeks after the initial launch of the beta, gold bars were made available. You could buy gold bars to use instead of money, paying for the in-game items effectively with real money via proxy, which is essentially what a microtransaction is in essence. You pay X amount of money for X amount of an in-game currency with no real value. Its only value is that the game says so, so you can then use that as an in-game currency to buy digital pieces of nothing, which you can use in the game. In my opinion, it's a total total waste of your money to buy microtransactions. However, as long as you know what you're paying for up front, which is really nothing, to each their own. It also doesn't help that the economy was and still is inconsistent. Some things cost reasonable amounts, slightly better items cost ridiculous amounts. How can you naturally progress when there's such a huge jump between things in cost when there isn't in what they can actually do for you? It's nonsensical. But for the time being it was still the beta mode, so whatever. Following criticism, the economy would be balanced a bit more. Things would start paying half of the absolute painful bare minimum to be enjoyable rather than just a tenth of it. It wasn't so bad, at least you could see yourself progressing in that state. It still required a lot of grinding, but that's not an aspect you want to completely negate. Off of this topic, how Red Dead Online structured itself from go was arguably quite frustrating. Many activities had two sides to them. You had a simple objective, deliver a wagon for example, with your mates. Other players would have the agency to stop you if they so wish. This didn't feel competitive, but rather like a nuisance. Red Dead Online felt at first like it was the perfect brewing pot for griefers, and honestly, after a while, that's how you start playing it too. The notion of a minuscule money reward on the off chance that you manage to successfully carry out an open world activity without being hammered to death by an ugly bastard wearing a vibrant pink cavalier hat doesn't take long to become unappealing. I should know, I'm the fucker in the hat. Fortunately, this would be half fixed down the line with an aggression meter of sorts. The more passive you were to other players, the more protected you would be unless you opened hostilities. There was now a means to parley with players who were giving you grief, forcibly disabling their ability to attack you for a set amount of time. Then there was the ability to press charges against griefers, labelling them as hostile and giving every player in the lobby the freedom to fight back without the risk of being penalised. Sadly, towns remained pretty hostile in this period and would frequently be ground zero to mindless mayhem. There was no way to resolve immersion problems in the game, as it just wasn't immersive in the slightest.
Let's go on the premises. I'm getting the gun now. Holy shit!
Yes, wait.
That's it!
Want to go to Valentine and trade? Too bad, it's kicking off for the 875th time this morning. And that's something that hasn't changed, except now it's way more acceptable for a lot of these players who have sunk an ungodly amount of hours into this beast, as that's all there's actually left to do. When I fired up the game, I captured this happening inside 60 seconds simply to prove the point. The game also still penalises you for getting killed by a bored griefer by respawning you miles from where you need to be to get on with the content, and it's just a piss take. I get what it's trying to go for by removing you from where the mindless violence is happening, but sometimes that's where you actually need to be, and it's the other player who's the problem and needs to be moved. This is a coin that plenty of Red Dead Online players, including myself, have been on both sides of. I've been the victim, I've also been the mindless axe murderer. But of course it's made all good because you have emotes that you can use to say hello to other players moments before they inevitably shoot you, and turn whatever objectives you had for your session into feuding with some random 13-year-old who drinks far too much Monster Energy and never leaves his bedroom. Another problem from this early on that I'd like to mention is the horse. When called, it takes 5 business days to actually rock up, so hearing players whistling like mad is also pretty common. In busier lobbies, many NPCs simply won't spawn. The environments would feel far more empty than in the single player counterpart, something I'd argue to be a touch unavoidable, but also animals you'd need to hunt would also spawn less. The end result is a world space that just felt a little sparse, and it still does. Red Dead Online did come with a story in its beta, however it was short and it would be a while before this would see any continuation. It did end up setting a false expectation that the online mode would be richer than it perhaps was. However, there were also stranger missions that would be added to down the line in which you could meet story characters and more. It was cool for the cutscenes, but when it boiled down to the actual gameplay that these stranger missions entailed, it always felt rather rinse-repeat. And sometimes you'd outright be doing the exact same thing that you were doing as part of one of these smaller jobs to make a little bit of extra money. There was also a matchmaking feature where you could join lobbies for more direct firefights and other cool matchmaking bits in smaller, more enclosed spaces. It was pretty sick and I quite liked it, but Red Dead Redemption 2's deliberately somewhat sluggish gameplay, which worked amazingly for the story, didn't in my opinion translate well and be as fluid when faced with players using the same controls. That may be my hand's inability to do anything fiddly with any kind of precision, but it was fun and I won't pretend it wasn't. On the whole, from the beta mode, there were a ton of issues, and that's fine, but many of those issues persist to this day, which is not. Besides this, Red Dead Online would suffer when you'd get to a point where acquiring new gear, money, ammunition, better weaponry and a decent camp is no longer a problem. You'd think this is where you can go out and be the baddest outlaw in the West, the best gunslinger, the most reliable bounty hunter, but really at first at least, there wasn't an awful lot to do that you hadn't already done. You'd think as you entered the stronger phase of your journey, you'd be doing things lower level players simply cannot do, but that didn't come in until much later. But even then it isn't anything particularly special. I also found the posse system to be weird. You could set up a temporary posse of 4 members for free. However, you could pay a bit of money in game and set up a 7-member posse that was permanent. However, you could only ever do missions with 4 players. What's the point then? But you get the idea. Red Dead Online was off to a rocky start, but at least it seemed as if there was some kind of roadmap intended for this going forward. Me and my friends may not have enjoyed it as much at first as we'd hoped we would, but we were excited for the future, in which there would be so much more content. More content was coming, but it wasn't quite how we expected. As time went on, the game received different passes for things, such as bounty hunting, which of course you had to pay for with either money you amassed whilst mindlessly playing a really miserable bare bones online component, or if you don't have the patience for the dire selection of money making opportunities that simply take too long to do, you could use microtransactions to use gold instead of the in-game money. Look, people will argue if you played the game you wouldn't need to cave and buy the license to do the bounties, for example, through the use of microtransactions at least, but nobody in their right mind is grinding for dozens of hours simply to unlock the actual content. That's nonsensical. Predatory practices must embed themselves better than I think, because I don't understand how anybody cannot see this. I won't say it's the worst offense of all time, and obtaining gold in the game can be done. However, it takes a long time, and what's available when you're getting started outside of the story missions, which go nowhere, is honestly incredibly dull. But I will say, once you'd obtained the bounty hunter license, it did create a fair bit of fun, and legendary bounties, or whatever the game called them, were decent. Plain, simple fun, exactly what Red Dead Online needed. However, the most intricate and highest effort part of the entire operation was the cutscene introducing you to the concept of paying for the pass, rather than the content itself. Whilst it made me feel a bit sour in hindsight because the game knows it hasn't earned the patience of the masses and is offering a real money alternative to capitalise on that, the classic create the problem, sell the solution technique, for a short bit it felt as if life was finally being pumped into this game. Hunting bounties with your mates is every bit as fun as it sounds, and every bit as ludicrous too. Unfortunately, like any single mechanic though, it wouldn't be enough on its own. And you can't get the thought out of your mind that in a world where Red Dead Online didn't have microtransactions, it wouldn't have cost anything to do bounties, as the bounty hunter license is a soft paywall. It's designed to be a mild inconvenience to generate a touch of revenue. The live service with microtransactions model is notorious for doing this, as if you add up enough inconveniences, eventually a lot of people will just cave and start paying with real money no matter how much time they invest into earning in-game money. It's not the heaviest I've seen it applied by far, but I'm not going to pretend that it's not slightly scummy. There were a couple of other roles in this update, I believe: the trader and the collector. The trader allowed you to go into business with your camp steward, Cripps, who I once accidentally firebottled and dumped in front of a respawned Cripps, but that's a different story. You basically transport shit and had to avoid getting griefed in the process. And then there was the collector role, something with fortune teller Madame Nazar. She likes when you get things for her. It costs 15 gold bars to acquire the collector's bag and start this mundane role. Mate, I just want a bag that I can put shit in, not premium Gucci. The mental gymnastics one must go through to look at this and not see what the game is doing is a bit absurd, in my opinion. But this one isn't a huge problem. Just pretend Madame Nazar doesn't exist, and for some reason she never showed up again for me anyway. Seems weird that you can pay money to take odd jobs from a character who seldom actually spawns. Anyway, there was something else that came along with Red Dead Online worth mentioning at this point too. Introducing the Outlaw Pass. You pay with real money / gold bars to purchase the Outlaw Pass, which affords you different unlocks the more you level up, basically rewarding you passively, which compared to going to a store to buy meaningless gear felt appealing, except it's paywall behind a microtransaction. Unless you have the gold bars, in which case fair enough. Worse yet, it cost 35 gold bars. However, the digital store only allowed you to buy bundles of set amounts. 25 or 55. So in order to get the Outlaw Pass without any gold bars in your possession, you had to buy almost double the amount of gold bars you actually needed, meaning you had to spend more money than the price tag leads you to believe, giving your meaningless leveling meaning by locking a reward system behind a paywall with a price tag that is actually just not true because you cannot buy that exact amount of an in-game currency needed, meant people were forking over more than the game claimed it cost. It was a pretty fucking anti-consumer move. It was a tactic I'd have expected from Ubisoft, not Rockstar. Considering that stuff is just extra, I don't mind it being something that you have to pay a little bit extra for, but if players are going to be paying through the microtransactions, let them at least buy the exact value of what they're buying, rather than more. But that's just a traditional Battle Pass archetype. You pay money to access the pass, and then you play the game as much as possible before that season ends in order to maximise the rewards you receive from it. You can unlock gear, clothes, abilities and the like. It's just extra stuff. But it in itself has no bearing on the experience. There were a few of these for Red Dead Online over the years, however now that seems to be discontinued. Down the line you'd also get the Trapper and Naturalist roles. I couldn't be bothered paying more real money just to have an acceptable experience in the online component for a game I'd already paid for, so I guess we'll never know what those were about, but frankly I couldn't give less of a shit. This video is just going to be everybody realising how unqualified I am to make this critique. I did dabble, mind you, in the surface level bits that went with it, and honestly it didn't hook me for longer than 5 minutes, but at least it was content and that's something. Basically you had the Trapper, which allowed you to hunt legendary animals and I presume turn it into cool gear, and the Naturalist where you could go all hippie and zen about the whole thing and make a side career out of murdering poachers and studying the wonders of the animal kingdom. I hear the Trapper stuff had its perks as a hunting mode, including legendary animals, but I was more or less tapped out by this point, but that says more about me than the game. Finally, and not necessarily in release order, you got the Moonshiner update in which you could create your own moonshining business. You'd have your own secret moonshine lair full of all sorts of attractions. Probably the best update outside of the bounty hunting, and it actually felt as if it was coming together. Like I said, I was fully tapped out by this point, but it was good to see some life in the online component once again. Sadly, I'd not gotten back into this game by this point. I was content with the single player mode to appease my gunslinging needs, but had I gotten back into it, my critique was no longer with the amount of content releasing. I can't really comment on the individual quality of everything that released for Red Dead Online, but I'm led to believe it was a mixed bag. Some content updates were better than others, some were just nonsense and others were actually decent, the way it usually goes. But regardless of the content releasing, discontent was brewing in Red Dead Online's communities. So, when the big update stopped, it wasn't met with much applause. The last major content update Red Dead Online received was Blood Money, which dropped in July of 2021 on the 13th. 1 year and 6 months ago, and since then there have been updates fixing bugs and things and time challenges. At holidays like Halloween and Christmas, the game would find itself enveloped in a spooky fog with some timed multiplayer modes, or there'd be snow blanketing the whole map, but that was kind of it. It felt as if, after Blood Money, an update for which I've seen people joke that Rockstar put more work into the trailer than the update itself, momentum simply ceased. It may seem like they had released a lot of content for Red Dead Online, but when you boil it down to what you actually find yourself doing in these updates, how much of it was actually different to what you were doing before? Last year, Rockstar confirmed it had no plans for any more major content updates for Red Dead Online, which would prompt the campaign #SaveRedDeadOnline, which saw many express their love for Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Online and their desires to see it thrive. Of course, those pleas went for the most part unanswered. Red Dead Online was fun for many over the 4 years of its existence, but many are left with sour tastes in their mouths with how this game and its player base was treated by the very people who made the fucking thing. Less popular games' multiplayer modes come and go, but for a game where popularity is more timeless, having an online component that isn't well maintained but is still more than happy to take more of your money is a bit weird, especially when Rockstar still update their other bestseller title Grand Theft Auto 5's GTA Online mode regularly with new content left, right and centre. Both are up there in the top 10 greatest selling games of all time, with Red Dead Redemption 2 sitting at 8th whilst Grand Theft Auto 5 sits at 2nd. GTA 5 is older, more popular by miles and more profitable by more money than you could possibly imagine, with 170 million copies sold. And its online component gets far more content and far better treatment than Red Dead Redemption 2's does, probably for good reason. I can't comment as to whether or not it's good, but Red Dead Redemption 2's nigh on 50 million copies sold isn't a number to scoff at anytime soon. Having two live services that generate a metric shit ton of revenue and encourage people to play the games they made with such passion was literally a license to print money. It seems odd that then for some reason, I presume Take-Two Interactive, Rockstar Games' parent company, didn't want that. But the explanation is pretty clear. With GTA Online alone, they already had a license to print money. Adding to it when your profits are through the roof anyway seemed to be a waste of time. GTA Online still gets the majority of the attention. It's a decade-old game that's been re-released a silly amount of times, whereas Red Dead Redemption 2 isn't even getting a next-gen update that we're aware of, which is odd when it's a much more recent title. Grand Theft Auto has become a total cockroach of gaming, and people are very quickly getting sick of it, and reasonably so. Red Dead Redemption 2 and Red Dead Online was the opportunity for Rockstar to sustain the lightning in the bottle that they captured with GTA and move forward, but they simply did not take it. The community pleaded and pleaded, but Rockstar, probably because Take-Two didn't allow them, chose not to listen. It's been interesting to see how much more disconnected than usual Rockstar is from its games' fan bases than other companies. They don't seem to care, they don't adhere to hype or anything like that, and there's an element of that I hold respect for, but they also don't listen to feedback when things aren't going their way. It appears as if the communities surrounding their games simply do not exist as far as they are concerned. I'll give an example. In 2021 they released Grand Theft Auto, the Trilogy, the Definitive Edition, a poorly titled, poorly remastered bundle of Grand Theft Auto 3, Vice City and San Andreas. It was broken, incredibly buggy, and simply not worth the money it cost to discover that, and that's a state I'm led to believe those games are still in today. Rockstar, seemingly since the launch of Red Dead Redemption 2, the absolute best story-driven video game I've ever had the pleasure of playing, has seemingly grown arrogant as a collective. That or because they've never really established channels to receive much needed community feedback in the first place, have no real way to obtain it. Why Grand Theft Auto 5 is getting a next-gen remaster is beyond me when Red Dead Redemption 2 seemingly isn't. I know it's one of those games, like Skyrim, that simply refuses to die, but Red Dead Redemption 2 is so unbelievably good that it deserves far more love than it receives. I mean, from the consumer it gets all the love in the world, but from its own publisher, it seems to have stopped existing. Grand Theft Auto 5 never received a single player expansion in favour of the online mode, and fair enough. Red Dead Redemption 2 never received a single player DLC that would have been pretty cool, even if only to those who wanted more in any way they could get it, like an Undead Nightmare 2 for example, in favour of an online mode that received the bare minimum of care, especially compared to what it could have been. It's confusing. Because if you compared Red Dead Online to the prospect of an Undead Nightmare 2 for example, I'd take that any day of the week. And I'm not especially fond of Red Dead Redemption's Undead Nightmare, I think it's alright, but zombies aren't my thing. But I'd find it infinitely more enjoyable than the present online component that we've received instead. Red Dead Online deserved far better than it got. It's not like Red Dead Redemption 2 is wasted potential on the whole, but in reality it was. Red Dead Online could have been so much more. It could have enhanced the entire experience and taken it to the next level. In the end it wasn't that, and so despite being one of the best games of all time in my opinion, Red Dead Redemption 2 is also one of the most disrespected by the very company that made and published it, and likely more accurately by the parent company of that company. Maybe the root of the problem is Take-Two, who would prefer to rake in as much as possible from the tried and trusted method of GTA Online, and from a business perspective it's not an unreasonable tactic, but creating an online component for a more recent, equally worthy game, and then not allowing Rockstar to fully work with it and turn it into something equally as in-depth and lucrative seems almost like bad business, but what would I know? Maybe the explanation is a more forward-thinking one, with Grand Theft Auto 6 in development, with future projects and all that. But I don't know. I feel in the time it's had, Red Dead Online as a product people went into with expectations should have been far better than it ever got to be. Now, I'm sadly convinced that it never will be. The servers are still active, there are still many players online, and there's still an awful lot to do if you're new to the whole thing. But a lot of that content feels the same, uses griefing as a core mechanic, and even outside of content, griefing is sure to stand between you and whatever you wish to accomplish in that session. The worst part about Red Dead Online's griefers is, you can't even blame them, because for many people who have sunk endless hours into this game, that's simply all there is left to do. Maybe Red Dead Online is no longer worth saving. If it had a chance in hell at being salvaged, it's my belief Rockstar would have long done it by now, if that was something that they as a collective wanted to do. But it's a tragedy just the same. Red Dead Online will go down in history for never achieving what it so easily could have. So, how could all of this have been better? Well, firstly, a balanced in-game economy goes a long way. I get the incentive to have some form of microtransaction system running, though I wholeheartedly disagree with the entire premise of it when you paid money for literally getting the game to begin with. I think it's a scummy practice that should be wiped off the face of the earth, because its entire premise is to sell people on saving time by buying gold bars with real money. Why, if this was something you as a company were proud to develop, would you want people spending less time enjoying it? For a company that is a collective master of playing the long game with its titles, as evident with previous releases, how the absolute fuck have you forgotten how to play the long game? Anyway, the economy should allow for things to cost reasonable amounts that take a reasonable amount of time to get, rather than a ludicrous one. That stable and camp upkeep needed to be kept the fuck away. The reward system needs rebalancing to ensure that you can get your foot in the door, so it's not a slog until you can afford a pass to do bounties for meagre sums once again to start up that moonshining business. The environment and the storytelling needed to be much more engaging. The single player did a great job at this, but in playing the online it often feels as if you're just exploring a shell of that very same open world. I get a lot cannot be anywhere near as intricate as the single player stuff, but that's where you have to get really creative to even it out. Red Dead Online simply does not do this enough. The camp shouldn't cost an arm and a leg to upgrade the simplest thing like changing out a redundant tent for a redundant cooking pot. Maybe add property so people can feel like they're building on something. The game simply needs less time doing mind-numbing delivery missions. Make the horses spawn closer so they don't take a year to actually show up. Fuck it, make them spawn right in front of you. Red Dead Online isn't immersive anyway. The moonshiners can stay. Bounty hunts can also stay. Give us more intricate stories to go along with the bounty hunts though. Maybe break them down into actual stories, sometimes rather than just a dossier cutscene followed by the same old nonsense, and make the reward give you the feeling that it was worthwhile doing. I'd also suggest making the towns safe zones. Entering a town in Red Dead Online where all the shops you need are is at present one of the most risky places to go, as you'll almost certainly get shot. Inside shops you cannot be harmed, but step outside and you get JFK'd instantly. And you have to get to them first. Hang on guys,
two of us go on the back, two of us go on the back.
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Man.
Oh, he's going out the back.
Oh no, he's not. He's not. Yeah, he's gonna go out the back.
He's trying it. He's trying
Yeah, look. He's gone to the back and he's like, no, they're there as well.
What's he gonna do? What's he gonna do is the question.
With Saint Denis, I get you can't make the entire thing a safe zone, but Valentine and Rhodes, for example, why not? What harm does it do? To be fair, a firefight in a town can be fun though, from time to time anyway. So alternatively, you could create bigger safe zones, or you could have different types of lobbies you can join. Passive lobbies, where you can't harm other players, and lobbies more inclined to free-for-alls where players can murder whoever they wish. That way you can tailor the experience going in, knowing that if you're in for a gunfight, that's what you'll get. But if you want to just do your challenges and grind in peace, then you'll absolutely accomplish that with ease too. There also needs to be a greater variety in the actual things you can do, especially when carrying out missions and jobs. Why can't we on a whim carry out a massive heist that comes with a hearty reward? Why can't we just hold up a bank on a whim? Make players compete over doing something first, then it has to take time to reset, not just shooting each other on sight because they're bored. Make fast travel free. After a while, riding around in negative space will get tiresome for any game. With the story mode it isn't so bad as there's always something to distract you. But for Red Dead Online, you know players will need to quickly hop between A and B, so why penalise them for that when your game doesn't offer anything in between that they'll actually do? It's impossible to make the world as comprehensive as the story mode, so that doesn't really counteract my previous point about leaning into Red Dead's well-placed environmental storytelling and random encounters. Also, why not dial back the profanity filter on naming your horse? I understand why I can't name my horse after a murderous dictator, or a slur, but if I want to name my horse Big Donkey Cock, you know what, forget I said anything. A lot springs to mind immediately for how Red Dead Online could be infinitely better. Alas, none of it will likely ever happen. I feel it's too late for that. I don't mean to be negative about the whole thing, but from my perspective, that just seems to be the most likely outcome, and if Rockstar do actually do something to improve this shit show, I'll eat my flamboyant pink cavalier hat. In conclusion, Red Dead Online is a game with entire wagons full of wasted potential. It could have been the ultimate online cowboy game, the ultimate experience for those who wanted to take Red Dead Redemption 2's experience and simply enjoy it in the company of their friends. I'm not saying Red Dead Online doesn't have its moments where it is pretty fun, of course it does, but what it doesn't have is the heart that Red Dead Redemption 2 has, or the commitment from its own creator to make it better in any way. It's a shame that in order to enjoy Red Dead Online, you either have to be really creative or a hammer-wielding maniac battering everybody in sight. Sadly, Red Dead Online is a neglected footnote in the sacrifices Rockstar have had to make because of some corporate bellend wanting to release Grand Theft Auto 5 for the PS5. I can't see it changing ever, and in failing that at the very least anytime soon. Red Dead Online simply deserved better. And that brings us to the end of today's lengthier video than usual. Thank you all for watching. I really hope that you've enjoyed this, or at least have been able to take something away from it. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends and all that wonderful stuff. That would be incredibly fantastic. I'd massively appreciate it. And if you like history, be sure to check out my history channel Decades, but if not, don't worry about it, it's just there if you fancy. No pressure. And hopefully, with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point, but until next time, please take care and goodbye.